Okay, so this is the Sophist answering Parmenides, winter 2021, session 6, the generation of ideas and themes. So, Jackie, I just returned the recording on to thank you for your help, as well as Andrew. And thank you everyone for attending and being keen to do this course. I'm still not sure it was a good idea. I think it's very tough, and all this being, not being, same and other, you know, it can just get your head spinning. So, but I don't know, people seem to be smiling still, so I guess that's okay. It's certainly not taught much at universities because it's just too advanced. It's too difficult to teach this stuff. So, you know, it's not given to undergraduates, it's given to you guys because you can handle it, right? So we'll be having a drink at 7:30, hopefully. I noticed, I won't mention any names, some people might have started already, but that's a good thing. I'll just quickly mention the courses coming up. So in about a month's time, have a look on the website. We've got on Monday nights, we've got Platonism and Christianity again. Going to revamp that a little bit, tweak it a little bit. So that might be fun, even if you've done it before. In this time slot, we've got Timaeus and Critias. So that's a lot easier than what we're doing right now, a lot more fun, some great cosmology, world soul, and of course the Atlantic myth, the myth of Atlantis, I should say. So that's in there. And reading Plato is on Wednesday night. And there's a few people actually who are going to do that go back to that as a revision thing. So that's great. It'll be good to have them there. And if you're keen to do that, yeah, you're welcome to come along as well. Now, the final thing to announce is that next Thursday week, I should say, I'm doing something for the Melbourne School of Continental Philosophy. Look up their website, or I've got a link on the latest blog on our site, doing this grand overview, Plato's theory of forms, which kind of finishes with the Sophists, with this last section. And it's for people who don't necessarily have any knowledge of Plato. So it might be for you, might be interesting for you, it might not be. If you want to have a chat about it, about whether I think it's suitable, yeah, just give me a hoy. All right, so let's start with a bit of a general overview. Mary was just saying before that it's hard to bring it all together. You get it in fragments. So let me try to give you a bit of an overview, and apologies, or maybe to Effie, but maybe this is good for Effie because I'm going to go back into the Theaetetus and see how the themes in the Theaetetus come up in the Sophist now. So we can just bring it all together in our heads, because it's quite difficult. As I was telling Mary 5 minutes ago, you know, it wasn't until I did this course that a lot of things came together for me about the Theaetetus. And boy, have I read that a lot of times. So, you know, don't kick yourself if you're not getting it straight away. So I'll try to bring it together a bit here. So remember, with the first part of Theaetetus, straight away, what is knowledge? And I kind of I tried to bring this together for you by saying, well, what Plato's doing in Theaetetus is he's trying all the different pointing down ways, pointing down, not pointing up, you know, like Aristotle pointing down, all the pointing down ways to ground knowledge in sensible reality, in material reality, if you like. But anyway, in sensible reality, in our sensible experiential reality. The reality of sensible things in our experience. So the first hypothesis was really strong on that and said, knowledge is perception. Is that perception of things? And are these things external to the perceiver? This hypothesis presented various difficulties concerning appearance, the appearances, the perceptions, and the reality of the things themselves as external and independent. Now, remember how we put it as observer and observed, observation and the observed object. Remember, the Protagorean position was a retreat to the observer side. External reality is impossible to attain. Remember the cup exercise. And remember John Lennon, there is nothing you can see that isn't shown. There's nothing that you can experience that is not your experience. Now, are people doing these meditation exercises? Because if you're not doing them, you're wasting your time being here. It's only words. All I experience is my experience. What does that mean? Think about it. I experience nothing else but what I experience, which is in me. It's weirder than you think if you contemplate it. Protagoras says that only my experience says there is only my experience of the objects, the appearance of things. Indeed, appearance is reality. Man is the measure, as he said. Forget about external reality. Appearance is all there is. That's what's real. Now, in 20th century philosophy, this position, after Kant, Immanuel Kant, in the Enlightenment in 20th century, this position, which said there's only appearance, is called phenomenology. So you can look that up. It's a whole movement in philosophy. Okay, so that's the observer side. Then there's the observed side. So that's observer side skepticism. And then there's the observed side skepticism, Heraclitus. You never step into the same stream twice. Like the stream is never the same as itself. Now remember how Plato says that a form is the same as itself and not its other. Well, Heraclitus is saying that sensible things are never the same as themselves because they're always becoming other. And hey, remember, connecting with Plato, this is the Platonic becoming. So he's kind of Heraclitean. But in Heraclitus, as far as we know, or in this version of Heraclitus, there are no forms. So it's all becoming, all change. Reality, qua sensible things, which appear to be stable, are in fact in constant flux. So no statement can be grounded as absolutely true. It is raining. The tea is hot. Time dependent, but other statements as well. And every particular thing you want to refer to, there is no permanency about it. They are slowly becoming other to themselves. That there are no statements about the world that we can pin down absolutely in this way. Just as you indicate a sameness, it becomes other. It stops raining. The tea gets cold. All is changing. So that is the Heraclitean observed side, skepticism. Put it together with the Protagorean observer side, skepticism, and they conclude in the dialogue that it's just impossible to ground knowledge in the sensible world. It's important to see here again how Plato draws on both these views in his skepticism of grounding knowledge in sensible things. Protagoras, there is no external reality. Heraclitus, the sensible world is in a constant state of dynamics. You can't pin your statements down. For Plato, for Plato, he agrees with this in terms of sensible reality. But what he does is he brings back his reality to the forms. Reality is grounded in the forms of your experience, the structure of your reality. and it is forms all the way down. These forms are not external, they're internal. They are immediately known. Anyway, in the Theaetetus, it's soon realized that pure experience, your pure immediate experience, doesn't really amount to much in terms of knowing. Knowledge comes from making judgments about your experience as it happens, if you like. It's by thoughtful analysis that we establish truth. For example, we judge whether an appearance is an illusion or is it real? What sort of a judgment is that? It's a judgment about existence, about being. Is it an illusion or does it really exist? And so knowledge has something to do with making judgments about true and false. But what is true? Well, the truth of a statement, a logos, is about being true to something by correspondence. Now, do we remember this? Remember truth by correspondence, by referring to some reality. So the logos, the language, the discourse, the statement refers to some reality. And we could just think of this in simple semiotic correspondence. Green means go, red means stop. The letter T means to. T means to, and so on through the alphabet. My hi-fi, high fidelity, boasts fidelity or trueness in reproduction to the original sound of my favorite band as they played in the studio. Correspondence, truth by correspondence. I hope you've got a picture of that now. But what is false? What is a false judgment? If truth is by correspondence to some reality, then what do false statements, the false statements of the sophists, correspond to? An unreality. But what is unreal does not exist. It is no thing. So is false judgment referring to no thing at all? Okay, so in Theaetetus, remember the wax tablet memory analogy. This was one attempt at doing the correspondence thing. The hypothesis is false judgment is about a correspondence between the remembered world, my memory of the world, my construction of reality, and the immediate experience. It looks like Theaetetus coming there, but no, it's Socrates. True or false by immediate experience by reference to memory. Like memory is a wax tablet with symbolic marks on it in my brain here. Like I have a memory etched in my waxen mind of what Socrates and Theaetetus look like, and then I see someone coming. Theaetetus? No, it's Socrates. False judgment is when I associate my perceptions to the wrong memory. But what about a priori judgment? What about when that is false? Now here you're getting a tour of epistemology, you realize, because Kant later called this synthetic a priori. Remember when we said that? They are judgments which might be made without reference to sensible experience. This time, it's not a correspondence between immediate perceptions and memory. Instead, the falseness is an error considered between what is already in the mind. Like when I think that 5 + 7 = 11. Memory is like an aviary full of birds. Remember that? Full of birds caught from the wild. Bring them into your memory. When I make the error that 5 + 7 = 11, I caught the wrong bird. The 11 bird, not the 12 bird. But isn't what is in my memory already in some sense knowledge before I recall it? Both these analogies seem to just suggest that what is remembered but not recalled is not yet knowledge. Indeed, in these analogies, the remembered but not yet recalled appear to be in the realm of ignorance. So, abandon those ones. The final attempt to find a definition is true belief is knowledge when we add an account of it. So we have a true judgment and then we explain it. So knowledge is true judgment with a logos, with an account, meaning here rational explanation. But after going through various possibilities of how this might work, how this might bring a true judgment up to knowledge, it's found that it doesn't seem to add anything. The point is that true and false seem to already be worked out at the level of judgment. So at the end of Theaetetus, this is where we come back to. True and false seem to work at the level of judgment, and this suggests that that's where knowledge lies, in the logos of judgment, and not something added to it. But the problem remains about false judgment, thought, false statements. What are they? This problem of what a false judgment is left hanging at the end of Theaetetus to be picked up in the second part of the Sophist, where the definition of the Sophist requires making a claim that he is someone who says what is false, a logos that is false, pseudo logos. But before Plato takes us up to that, he makes a new beginning. With the new beginning, at the beginning of the new dialogue, we come at the same problem, not through a theory of knowledge, but through a method of investigation. The method of investigation aims to define things according to their form. Can you see the two layers here in correspondence? This isn't logicism where you bring it all back to language. We've got two layers here. Defining things, logos, in correspondence with their form. The method works on both levels. Can you see that? How we're working on both levels, connected by the names. It's important to see this. Like the weather map and its description. Does that help? You have the account and then you have the weather map. Like the picture of the ideal cell that we had up on the screen and the label picture, and then the text of the textbook describing it, the logos and the form. An account or definition is at the level of language discourse, but according to Plato, forms are the ultimate reality. What they refer to is the ultimate reality. Forms are the ultimate reality of our experience to which they refer, and forms are, incredibly, in us. They're not external, they're immediate. The number 2, the circle, we know it immediately. The account, the logos can be by correspondence to particular things considered as an ultimate reality or considered as shadows of the reality, right? Or more philosophically, more directly, the account can be of their formal nature.
Bernie, I don't mean to interrupt you, but
no worries.
Does that mean that you have to learn forms, or are they innate? Or I know what we say. It's like the slave boy or being taught something he already knows, but in this instant, because you said the forms are the ultimate reality, they are not external within us, but is that something that innately exists in us, or something that has to be teased out, or something we need to learn to connect the neurons to make that connection, which then becomes part of our cognitive thinking?
Does anyone else want to have a go at explaining that? Have a go at answering that?
I think in the Timaeus, the demiurge makes the cosmos by reference to the forms, so they seem to be there before anything else. However, our knowledge of the forms is because our souls knew them before we were born. So that's where our knowledge is in our soul, because our souls encountered those forms before we're born. That's what all I know of it, really.
So learning is recollection. It's really on that. And so the number 2, if we can use mathematics, the ideal circle, right? We remember them through our experience. So we see 2 things, or our mother teaches us about 1 and 2 and 3, or square pegs and round holes, or whatever elementary thing it is, right? And supposedly we remember what we already know. What's important for us is its intuition, as the mathematician said against the logicists. It's intuition, it's inside us. It's already there in an important sense, and it's immediate. You don't have to go through your senses to find 2, but 2 can be expressed in your senses, in 2 cups, in 2 pens, and so on. And the way Plato puts it is they partake, remember the language, they partake in 2ness, right? They participate in 2ness, and you remember what you already knew. So does that help, Mary, in going back to that stuff?
Very much so. So the forms are there before we're born, something that we know, but it has to be prompted or relearned in a way, not relearned, but brought out from what we know. It's there already, and it's teased out by what our experiences are.
Yeah, we become aware of it, perhaps. Like,
yeah,
2 cups isn't the concept of 2, but it expresses the concept of 2. Does that language help? Expresses it, and so that's how we remember it. Okay, so I'm just about to show a few slides, but we'll just finish this. So yeah, where was I now? Okay, so this is all about the method of division. So we define things, and then we have this other level, the level of the forms, and this is where we're doing our method of investigation, right? We're making the distinctions, and we're making distinctions inside distinctions. Now, the form of distinction, island and sea, think of that, same and other, right? That's what we're using here in this method of investigation. We're using the method of investigation to establish, in this case, a definition, right? So it's not a definition of a particular sensible thing, like a cup, right? It's a definition of a concept, the concept of the sophist. It's a social concept, and we'll discuss what that means. The method of division is to define the sophist by making distinctions within distinctions on one side. So let's review that now. I'm going to share the screen, and we'll go through this again.
As you're doing that, can I just...
Yep.
I listened to some YouTube from professors around the world on the sophist, and one of them suggested that the method of distinction is actually a sophist method that Socrates was using to disprove the sophists. Is there any truth in that? Was it a philosophical method, or was it a sophist method?
Do you mean, where did he get it from?
Yeah, Like, was
Yeah.
it what the sophists actually did?
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. This is where it first appears. I don't know whether there's some scholarly work on that, but yeah, there's interesting stuff in Heraclitus, actually. Yeah, there's interesting stuff in Heraclitus around this, but yeah, it's kind of a difficult thing and a bit of a, you know, a scholarly thing to try to work out where it came from, because we don't really know. Okay, all right, so let's, hopefully everyone can see the screen now. If you can't, with the
Sorry,
slide.
can I just, I think it raised curiosity for me, because it's quite different to that island and not island, because remember when you first started teaching this, you said the sea does not exist without the island, but the island can't exist without the sea, and in fact they're interrelated. But the distinctions between the hunting, you know, by hook or by net, they can exist independently. So it's a very different distinction what you're doing here on the screen to the distinction he does at the beginning of the Sophist. Because in the beginning of the Sophist, those distinctions are not codependent on each other.
Okay, give me the example. Give me one of the examples again. Which one?
Well, for example, you've got here, and I did remember, it's one of the few things that I
Like
think
say
I
hunters and
the island. I remember you said in introduction that the island is an island. Without the sea, there is no island.
that's right.
Right. So there's a codependency there. They are kind of one in their separateness. So they're distinct but one. Is that what not you?
Yeah, that's right. Yep.
Right. But the distinctions made right through the Sophist, you know how you have that screen where there's the whole division?
Yep.
They're not codependent. You can still hunt with a net, even if there's no hunting with a hook. So he's making distinctions in the Sophist that aren't like the distinctions you made here. It's a different type of distinction.
So hunting with a net is distinguished from not hunting with a net.
But they're not codependent. One can exist without the other, whereas the sea cannot exist.
Ah, no. Okay, I get it now. No, it's just the one. Hunting with a net is a distinction. Hunting with a net is a distinction, and it's distinguished from not hunting with a net. Or, yeah, not hunting with a net, that's right. So it's one. It's one there. So this is just this one on the screen now. Is everyone seeing that okay? Yell if you're not. This is just island. This is the distinction island. The island has its other in the same. This is the one. We're talking about the Platonic one here. We're not talking about Platonic two. This is the Platonic one. The Platonic one has a background as well as a foreground, right? Island is the island, right? When I say I got to the island and I walked on the island is the island. It is all the rocks. But notice, it's weird, right? And contradictory, but it's how we construct our reality. It is only the island because it's not the sea. So it is a one, not a two, definitely. But it has an opposite. And so we'll get to that. I mean, sea is not a great example, but if you think of there's a single island on a sphere, on a one sphere, sea is the absolute opposite. There's sea on a sphere, on the globe, and one island, right? It is an opposite, like the greater and the smaller. Okay, so let me go through this, and hopefully this will help going through this again. So we've made the distinction of arts. Okay, so there's everything else, but there is the arts. Okay, or the crafts, techne, right? And then we make the distinction of acquiring. Now, notice what happens here. We've got the arts, and then within the arts, we make the distinction of acquiring, and we immediately change the value, if you like, of both sides of the distinction. We got of acquiring, but all the other arts are of production, because we've made this binary distinction within it, okay? So we've made the distinction of acquiring, which is like island, and sea is of production, okay? And then we've made, within of acquiring, we've made the distinction by capture. And so that's the knot of that is acquiring by consent. Okay. And so we keep doing this as we go down. Something in its negation, and this is what we need to do, doing it on one side all the time to get a definition. And so as we have already done, this is exactly what we do when we key a plant. We find a plant species, or maybe it's a new species. We're trying to see where it fits in. Okay, we find out what species it is, then what genus it's in, then what family, what order, what class, what division, and what kingdom. So that's going up, but of course it goes down. And it goes down in terms of evolution as well, doesn't it? Like you have the original, if you imagine the original form of life, and then that becomes different, and then you have different breeding groups, and then you have the different types of you have plants, and then you have animals, and then you have all these different species, and so on. So it divides from top down, right? So you start broadly in the general, and you go to the particular. It's Platonic top down, and it's similar to the Darwinian way of thinking about the natural world. Okay. And so can we see how this is in 2 dimensions, how we can put it into a sentence? So we've got the logos running over the form, okay? And we're making a cut, we're making a cut within that cut, we're making a cut within one side of that cut within one side of that cut, and so on. Now, what we're trying to do is pay attention to the formal nature of reality, right, to its formal structure, because Plato is telling us, well, that's really what it's all about, okay? And interestingly, this formal structure, to help you with this, relates to actually something that came before. Effie was talking about where did Plato get it from? You know, well, where did Plato get this from, right? It's directly related to Zeno's paradox. Okay, so you imagine in the paradoxes, they're all similar, and I've confused them here a bit, but the point here is, call this length 1, right, from one side to the other, and imagine that you've got to travel from here to the other side, right? But what you've got to do is you've just got to go to the halfway point of what you've got left each time. So you go to the halfway point and you've got half to go. So then in this half, you go to the halfway point again, and you've got a quarter to go. You go to the halfway point again, you've got an eighth to go. You've got a 16th to go, and so on and so on. Do you ever get to the other side? Do you ever actually get to the other side? So you get a really small fraction, but there's always another fraction. So this is a particular form of infinite recursion that is interesting in various ways for Platonism, because it also brought up Eudoxus's method of exhaustion, which was the infinitesimal calculus, right? It's a form of infinity that is of interest there, but also here as well, because making this division again and again on the same side is exactly the same formally as what we're doing here in defining the angler. And we can actually see this in page 221b, where he uses half. He actually says half. There's your big hint, guys. For the arts as a whole, half by acquisition, half by coercion, half by hunting, half of animals in water, and so on and so on. And so we can relate these two. This is 3-dimensional, this is 2-dimensional, and then we can bring it down to the 1-dimensional for the Zeno thing. And I haven't done halves, but I've done a cut inside a cut because it was really too hard for us to do that. But you can imagine you're cutting inside a cut all the way to the end. I can't see it because I've got my people over there. And it just keeps going on and on and on, potentially going on and on and on. So formally, it is similar. This is elementary form dynamics we're looking at here. Okay, now another thing to say, right, is that while we're defining something, we just go down one side. But the nature of this reality we have, whether it's a social reality, right, what people do, you know, all the different arts, all the different practices, or whether it's a reality in nature, is that it is structured where you make the distinctions. Society makes the distinctions, you make the distinctions, and nature makes the distinctions wherever it likes, in a way. They can be made anywhere, right? So you can make a distinction anywhere you like. Okay, nature can make a distinction anywhere it likes. A species can develop, a distinct breeding group can develop anywhere it likes. In society, you can make a new art anywhere you like. Now, so where's the sophist? Well, it's a bit arbitrary, isn't it, to work out where the sophist is? It's not, don't worry too much about that. But think about this. This is what we're getting to now. Okay. What is not angling? What is not the being of the angler? Okay, so let's say the angler is way over here on the right with the arrow. And obviously the just outside the circle, that's not angling, is it? That's not angling. But what else is not angling? Are other forms of hunting other than angling not angling? Yeah. Other forms of acquiring by capture not angling? Only capturing with angling is angling, but all the others are not angling as well. So can you see how there is the not in the opposite, but there's also the not in not everything else. So all the other arts except angling are not angling. And so all the other things as well that aren't arts. So this is what we kind of came to last week. There's three different forms of other, right? Which we'll get to. I think that's it. Yeah. Maybe I should stop for questions there. Has anyone got any questions about that? And Effie, did that help at all with your question?
Yeah, it did actually a lot. Thank you.
Okay.
It's easy to get confused, especially if you start listening like I did to other people who have different terminology. I think it's best to really understand what you're saying first before I listen to others.
All right.
I did get confused there for a while, even though I think I had it beforehand.
Naming, it relates to naming, doesn't it? You know, I mean, this is the thing, isn't it? We've got the forms and we've got the naming. Remember they said at the beginning of the Sophist, they said, well, all we start with is the name, and your name, you might think you know what Sophist is, or you have an idea of what Sophist is, but we don't know it's the same as mine. So what we need to do is do the dialectic together, as they're doing in this dialogue and as we're doing now, and make the right distinctions and then name them together so that the discourse, right, like the discourse of science with the term, with biology and the taxonomy there, the discourse has its clarity because it clearly names the distinctions that we've all made together. So it's a good example of that. Okay, anyone else?
Can I just ask about the, you made the distinction earlier on between observer and observed. You were saying how different thinkers fell on each side of that dichotomy. So with Plato's formal approach, is he there, and you were saying that the forms are not external, they're internal. Does that mean Plato is falling on the observer side because the forms are internal? But what then does he say about the material things of reality, the things that are observed? Are you saying they are still there externally, but the forms that they point to are internal?
Well, remember the Republic, remember the cave, you know, sensible things. I mean, it's the madness of Plato. It's the craziness of Plato. It's what people don't understand about Plato. Sensible things are shadows of their former reality. It's not that they're not real, It's just that the forms, when you pay attention to them, are found to be more real. So their reality is in their formal nature, and the forms themselves are more real than their sensible objects. So the answer is that Plato is absolutely on the side of internal. All knowledge is self-referenced, right? We construct our reality, right? We don't cause it. We don't cause our experience. We don't cause it completely. We cause it in some ways because we construct it, right? But it's internal. That's right. So there's no external reference because everything I experience is in my experience. Plato says, as John Lennon says, you can't know something that you don't know. You can't know something that is outside you in that sense. All you can know is what you experience. All you can experience is what you experience. So how do you solve that problem? The problem with the cup, right? Everything I know about the cup is in me, right? My construction of the cup is in me. I know that. I know it is. It's a construction from my senses. The Kantians, materialists, whoever they are, say, oh, there must be a cup in itself corresponding to it, which I don't know, but corresponds to it. There must be that. Because otherwise, if you take the Platonic view, you're completely mad. And what's the difference between this cup and a castle in the air and a complete illusion? You have to ground it. You have to ground it in materiality. Otherwise, you've got no ground for knowledge. That's what they say. But Plato says, no, calm down, calm down. If you work a bit at it, if you pay attention to this formal stuff that I'm telling you, then you don't have to panic and ground it in this external reality. It's actually, you can ground it in the forms, and the forms are immediately known in you, as we were saying, you know, by recollection, whatever else, you know, you remember the circle, you already knew it. What is it? You know, is it some fundamental structure of the mind or the brain or whatever? Or is it something you remember from a former life? It doesn't matter. He's saying they are internal. Yeah, so he's on that side.
When he says internal, they're internal, it doesn't mean they existed before we did. Is that what you're saying? Become eternal through our experiences, not internal through existing before we were born.
Well, yeah, I mean, see, this is where people used to translate Plato's words, which is where we get ideas come from. The word idea comes from as ideas, right? The form, instead of saying forms, you'd say ideas. But ideas, the idea of two suggests that the idea of two only exists in a mind, right? So it doesn't exist in things and doesn't exist externally. Whereas Plato would say it has an existence, right, that is independent from me, right? It's independent from you, right? There will be two when you and I are gone, Kula. There was two before you and I were here. It actually exists in this unknowable, in the insensible realm. The insensible realm that Plato is trying to draw your attention to. The realm in which all mathematics exists. All mathematics exists there, because that's insensible, isn't it? Give me one mathematical thing, one part of mathematics that's in the world. It's not. It's all in this realm. What is this realm? It exists before, yes. I suppose that's what he's saying.
And somehow internal in all of us.
Yeah, well, do you kind of feel that yourself?
Yeah, I do. But then when you mentioned that's internal, I started thinking about, well, how can it be internal for all of us? if it's out there externally and accessible, that kind of makes sense that we can all access it. But if it's internal to me, how is it internal to you as well?
Well, this is the meditation you need to do. This is the meditation that one needs to do in order to get into the space where the way of thinking that Plato is trying to direct you towards.
Right.
You remember when I would say in my mantra, where is two? Where is two itself? I have two cups, I have two things. Where is two? Where's the ideal circle, right? Where's the ideal sphere? We know lots of examples, but where are they, right? So on the one hand, they're in my mind, and I think they're in your mind. I'm not absolutely sure, but I think they are. And I think they're in everyone's mind who's in this class, but I'm not sure. I don't know. Where are they? Well, Plato's saying, pay attention to where to them in themselves. That's what he's saying. They're expressed in nature. The distinction, the form of the distinction is expressed in nature. It's expressed in our knowledge, right? We use it all the time to construct our reality, right? It's there, right? Where did it come from? Well, you work it out, but it's not like a thing. It's not a thing. It's different from a thing.
Bernie, I appreciate that mathematics exists up there and independent of us and the planets and outer space and whatever. And I think it's our intuition that recognizes that is so, because our experience bit by bit gradually over years tells us so. But I think it's a wild leap of imagination that I cannot grasp that this means that it existed in a soul in a previous life. I think that's a bit of adding a bit of hodgepodge rubbish to what was beautiful forms and mathematics.
Maybe, you know, you can probably guess my view might be similar to yours. But does that matter? Does that matter? I mean, there's still something interesting to learn from Plato here, isn't there? Because no one else has solved this problem, right?
Oh, I agree. I just don't like that.
So Plato is pointing, saying, founded in the forms. Maybe you can just totally forget about the past life stuff, the afterlife, whatever else. Forget all about that. Throw that away. That's not important, right? What's important here is not where it came from, but their nature. Look, can you see there's a sense in which the number two and the circle itself, for example, or the diagonal of the square, or whatever you want to use as an example,
I totally get that.
Is not in time.
Like the superficiality of the previous soul's life.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
but I think it takes away from the depth of the forms.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's where what we need to understand and meditate on, if you like.
Yeah. So
but not give it a silly kind of human kind of superficial reasoning over that.
Yeah, well, don't get
with respect, a lot of religions have actually taken up this position that there is an afterlife, etc. So I give it due respect, but I don't think I think I prefer to keep to the forms, understand that, and the mathematics.
Well, so that's a great idea. That's a perfectly good way to approach it, because don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Yeah. If you're not into that side of it, I don't think there's any problem. You know, this was you know, written a long time ago in a different environment. I mean, there's lots of things that are difficult to deal with. All right, I'm running out of time, and I'm just looking through here what I should. I think I should just go straight to this week's. All right, so maybe I'll go straight to this week's reading because we haven't got much time. I'll just do a little bit more and then we can have a general chat. So when we get to this week's reading, the consideration turns to discourse, language. What is discourse? What is logos? It has a particular formal structure. It must have because it exists, right? So we're talking about language, right? And names and verbs and everything, referring to the formal structure of reality, a structure that we are creating, right? As we know it. Remember the dynamics, you know, where knowing actually changes the reality, right? I didn't go back through that again because we ran out of time, but it's important. But language itself, of course, has a form because it's a thing, right? Language is a thing. So we weren't really paying attention to that. What is this form? And how does non-being participate in this form? If non-being is a class of being that permeates all being, then where is it in discourse? So Plato reduces discourse to nouns and verbs woven together in particular ways that make sense of their correspondence with reality. They make sense of in their correspondence with reality. So this is where logos is the science of dialectic. Proper names refer to particular things, sensible or otherwise. Common nouns refer to forms. Verbs refer to relations or actions. Now, we're kind of getting into a bit of logic here, right? This is actually before logic was invented by Aristotle and the Stoics as a separate, it's more grammar. It's more grammar here. Statements are either true or false or otherwise nonsense. Okay? A statement is either true or false, or it's not saying anything at all, generally in logic. False statements do seem to be saying something. They're not meaningless. But we are getting into the territory of logic here because Plato brings the language down to statements, to formal statements of fact about reality by reference to particular things or forms. Statements can be either true or false. Remember, logos is falsifiable by correspondence, by reference. Myth, some of the stuff that Martha was talking about there, myth is unfalsifiable. What happens in the afterlife? We don't know. We tell stories, but the stories are unfalsifiable. That is not logos. Mythos and logos are two different practices in Plato. What he introduces that's new is logos. Okay, the method of logos used in dialectic here. Okay, so logos is falsifiable. If I make a statement, all swans are white, that can be shown to be wrong by me finding one black swan. If I say all diagonals are irrational, that can be shown to be wrong by finding one diagonal that's rational. Sorry there, Alexandra. You don't need to know that, it's not important, but it's just the principle of it, right? It's falsifiable. It can be shown to be wrong, right? A myth, it's a myth, right? You don't say that myth's wrong. You don't say the myths of Zeus are wrong, right? Unless you're saying, oh, like the Easter Bunny comes at Christmas. It's wrong in that sense, right? Santa comes at Christmas. But it's not like logos where you can show that it's true or false by reference to sensible reality or by reference to forms or by reference in some other way. Negative statements say something is not. This is not an orchid. A sophist is not a philosopher, right? It is not means is other. And so this is how it works. This is just what we have been doing already. Okay, so there's nothing particularly new here in this section that we read for this week. Non-being is also in statements that are false. So first of all, it is stating something is not, right? a pea is not an orchid. This is not a sophist isn't a philosopher, but it's also in false statements. If I say this is Socrates coming, but it's Theaetetus. If I say that is an orchid, but actually it's a pea, right? It's in the other. In the error is in the other of. It's not an orchid, it is something else. It's not Socrates, it is something else. That's all it is. And so when he comes to Theaetetus flies, is other to the truth of Theaetetus sits. So a false statement is not saying, not referring to what does not exist, as they seem to think. Right? So you mightn't have thought it was a problem at all, but I'm trying to navigate you through this to show you what it's bringing up. Okay. So firstly, there is the agreement on the subject. All these statements are about Theaetetus, right? There is agreement, and then there is the predicate, which can be true or false. A false statement refers to what is other or doesn't exist. Theaetetus flies is not as things are. It is other to the truth that Theaetetus sits. As we found in the Theaetetus dialogue, thinking is taken as a private discourse, as making a judgment privately. Judgments are immediate perceptions. Sorry, judgments on immediate perceptions can be false, just as statements can be false. So I can think, judge, it is Theaetetus coming in the distance, but oh, no, it's Socrates. This judgment of initial immediate perception that it was Theaetetus, that I am experiencing, that I'm seeing, was wrong. It didn't correspond correctly with my memory of Socrates and Theaetetus. Okay, I'm just going to finish now on, I know I've gone over time because we're supposed to start having a little drink, on this creation from nothing, because I think it's a little bit interesting, and because we've got this far, we can see what's going on here, and it's interesting in the history of ideas. The dialogue builds to a definition of the sophist as a creator of imitations, right? A faker. And it does so, and in doing so, we define divine creation of nature, right? This is creations of plants growing out of the earth, of seeds, but also of life and lifeless substances, as he says. In other words, what we're talking about here is natural creation. Now, how's this different from human creation? Right? Human creation, we need materials. You know, I build a house, I need the materials, the wood and the nails and everything to build the house. When we create, right, I make a cup, I need the clay. When we create from something. But natural creation creates from what is not. At 265c, he calls nature the coming into being out of not being. The coming into being out of not being is what natural creation is. Through divine workmanship created by logos and divine knowledge that comes from God. Now, remember, we've got these two logoses, right? Those people who've done geometry, we've got ratio that's so important in geometry, and we've got this logos of discourse, and they seem to be unrelated, right? But this is one place where the logos of Stoicism, Christianity, and later Platonism, the logos of creation, the logos in John's Gospel, in the beginning was the logos, and the logos was God. Through him, all things were created, right? This is where there's a connection. Creation by logos is creation of being from not being. This is against Parmenides, who, according to Aristotle, said, nothing comes from nothing. And it's in the contradiction of this by Plato, that we get in the Latin, sorry about the Latin, creation ex nihilo, the doctrine of creation from nothing that then became the doctrine of the Jews, the Christians, and the Islamic faith, right? It is, it's also in the Trinity, as we were saying, where the Logos creates, is in the distinction of God and creates from God's otherness in the original. So now this contradicts Parmenides. It also contradicts Lucretius, who came later. There's it's quite famous book, just rediscovered in the Enlightenment, The Nature of the Universe. It's a poem. And so this is a materialist philosophy that says nothing can be made from nothing. So everything already existed, it's just mixed up, right? So this is a particular view against creation philosophy. There's no creation. Everything always already was there, okay? And Plato takes a position against this, and he takes it against this in his understanding of formal dynamics. Okay. So this is consider how it works. The original creator in principle is one alone. He has no primary stuff, matter, ether, whatever to create with. Let us call him being. So all he can create is from non-being, but the not being of himself, not this absolute non-being, right? The not being of himself. So God creates from what is not, which can only be his not, the not being of himself. And this is the principle of all creation, right? This is a principal thing. It's not actually necessarily something that happened in a particular time. It's a principle of creation. Because as Parmenides and Lucretius point out, any creation of difference is creation from what was not there before. Any creation of difference is a creation from not. And remember, Plato says there's all these little knots everywhere in the relations of things to each other. So it's a very different position on the philosophy and the philosophy of creation. So now you consider the God creating and creating in time, right? But what about before this, right? What about absolute non-being? This absolute non-being that Parmenides was talking about. Go back to that. Well, you can't say anything about it, because it's no thing, right? It's beyond all saying. This is also, in a sense, beyond or before the creation, before God, the creator. And so what happened in Platonism was you got an interest in this. In Platonic methods, Platonic mystical philosophy, which is the higher God, remember the form of the good that can't be spoken about in the Republic, the apophatic way, the denial, the way of denial, the negative way, to actually to go beyond being and knowing and to become aware of this higher nothingness, which is at the same time everything, or at least contains everything. So how does that work? In stating all that, it's a contradiction, but that is this whole tradition, which you can get into in Platonism, that goes right up into Christianity, Meister Eckhart, Nicholas of Cusa, and so on in the 14th century, and then into the Enlightenment. So anyway, I got to finish because I'm late. And so after we go through that stuff about creation in nature and how it's different from human creation, there's another form of human creation, which is the creation of imitation, right? And so you've got the imitative arts, and the sophist, well, is using words to create imitations, create images. So finally, the dialectic continues and finds the sophistic art is a type of human creation, not of things, but of images, like an illusionist, only he creates his images with statements. And so at last, we have defined pseudologos. And so at last, we've defined sophistry and the sophist. And so that's the end of our story. I'm going to get a glass of something to drink, and I'll be back shortly.
Matthew, you look like you just walked out of that tree then.
Yep. I like the virtual backgrounds. So that was actually a very good summary.
Yep.
Clarified it for me and brought it together.
Mary, I just got your email. It's not possible for me.
Sorry,
I just got your email and it's not possible.
but we put it at the
sorry.
time that you said.
11:30, I know, but
Sorry, Mary, I was on to Mary.
sorry. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. My apologies. Pete's now asked me if I can attend a meeting with him, which he thinks is important. So you can't, is there any later you can do?
I can do any time after 12.
Okay, perhaps around 2:30 or 3. I don't know, but I'm sorry to do this to everybody. Otherwise, I just have to proceed. Yeah.
David, are you still there? Can you do 2:30? David can't.
Hello?
Yeah.
2:30. What day? Tomorrow?
Tomorrow.
No, I can't tomorrow. I had school and then I had to take that off to go to work because I got a shift last minute. So I'll be working all day pretty much.
Let's talk about that later.
Yeah.
So should we
Cheers.
toast Plato?
Yeah.
Mr. Plato.
Later.
Oh, to Plato. Another great term.
Yeah,
So
very interesting.
so how do people find the sophist?
That was an excellent summary. That really brought it all together. Thank you.
Oh, just then?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's good.
Oh, tonight, because it all just beautifully merged.
Oh, right. What particularly, Martha? Just give us some reflection here. What particularly came together for you?
The being and not being, potentially just other, and in myriads of ways of others, as you look down in your circuits within circles. And interesting to think that if you're thinking in terms of the single being, what's outside of that circle of being is not necessarily a non-being, and therefore it's more reasonable to assume that if it's other than being and not a null void, that you could conceivably creation could arise from that.
Right.
Made
Yeah.
a bit more sense.
Yeah. So it's similar, that absolute non-being is similar to the thing about, you know, like the edge of the universe, like an enclosed universe, you know, like to say, okay, the Aristotelian view and other views was that, okay, you had this outer sphere of the universe. And, you know, the joke was, well, what if I stand on the edge and put my stick out? What if I put that into? You know?
Yeah.
So there always has to be an other, right? So how do you
Yeah.
deal with that, you know? And just something I did skip over, I skipped over a few things. So that's great. You mentioned it. The 3 forms of other, right? The first form of other is the opposite, right? So the other of the island is the sea, you know, the other of smaller is greater, right? So there's one other, which is the opposite, right? In those opposites, justice, injustice, the opposites. The other form of other is like, say, there's justice and not injustice, and then there's beauty and ugliness, right? And beauty, ugly is not justice, injustice. They're 2 separate forms. So beauty, ugly is other to justice, injustice. So it's the second type of otherness. The third type of otherness is the Parmenidean otherness, which is absolute otherness. Otherness in the sense of not an opposite to something that is. So being has an opposite, or God has an opposite, is not God. You know, God the Creator has an opposite, not God. Being has an opposite, non-being. You know, you can have this absolutely fundamental thing, right? It still has an opposite. So Parmenides is talking about something that is not in an absolute sense, not in a relative sense. So that's your third type of other. And that third type of other is what the mystics, right, are into. Because that Parmenidean other actually is the same thing. It all loops around to the form of the good in the Republic, according to them. It's that absolute nothingness that is the higher God.
Yeah, I got that when you kind of said that was higher than the being at the top of the pyramid. Yeah,
That's right.
When you talk about God as a creator, you can't get away from that image of turtle all the way down.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a problem. Yeah. Do you want to expand on that a bit more, Kula? So
Yes.
I don't know whether everyone knows about the turtles all the way down.
Well, it's about I think it was a Samoan story originally, but so they said, you know, who made the world? It's the giant turtle. Well, who made the giant turtle? Well, it was another turtle. Well, who made the other turtle? Oh, well, it was just turtles all the way down.
Yeah, and so it doesn't solve the problem.
No,
the problem is not solved.
The only time moves in circles. Time doesn't exist.
Well, the thing about Platonism, I might be a little bit biased here because I'm right into what's called biological self-referencing theory, right? Where it's totally self-referencing, you know, like there is no external referencing. Everything is internal referencing. Everything is feedback, okay, and in every respect. And I see that in Plato. So Plato is circular in every respect, in the sense that you mean. So like knowledge is knowing yourself, right? It's knowing yourself. Know thyself. That's what knowledge is in Plato, I think. Everything is self-referencing. Creation is self-referencing. Creation is creation from otherness, right? The otherness is in the same. So the dynamics of form, the way form generates difference is through its otherness, the difference already within itself, in that contradiction.
Bernie, there's a debate among religions about a single God or a dual God, good and evil, and how can, if the one, only one, all supreme being, how could he create evil, like the God and the Satan. But I suppose it's possible from the God, this being could create anything, including evil, from anything outside of its own sphere. Not necessarily its immediate opposite, as Benedict would say, but just other than.
Yeah, but does that mean that God? Does that mean that God created everything, or is that God just part of a bigger universe?
I don't know, but when
no, the problem of evil
it's a debate whether God.
Yeah, the problem of evil in monotheism.
You know, if everything has an equal, so if there is an almighty all being, which is good, truth, all, etc., is there an opposite, what we simplistically call Satan?
Yeah, well, it's a big problem in monotheism, right?
Yeah.
Because, you know, you get Manichaeism, and this is really good in Augustine. Get into Augustine if you're interested in this, because it's a debate going right through monotheism, not just in Christianity, but elsewhere. So in Manichaeism, which supposedly came from Persia, I think it probably did, you've got two forces, a force of good and a force of evil. So it's not yin and yang. It's not active and receptive, right? That's one within one. It's two forces, a force of good and a force of evil. Okay, so that's, now the problem in monotheism is that you need to only start with one, right? So there's two ways that's a problem. You know, you say, well, what does God create from? Oh, he creates from matter, and these things come together. So, and what about evil? How do you explain evil in the world? So how does Christianity explain evil? There's all this stuff about fallen angels, you know, that there was this angel and it was right hand of God, and then he turned against God. So God created the angel, but the angel then turned against him. Now, in Augustine, right, who's the Platonist sort of thing, he says that evil is just bad. It's not evil, like it's not a separate force, it's the absence or the lack of good. So it's in some sense, it's the otherness of goodness. And I think that's what you were probably getting at. So it's a huge debate. And if you want to get into it, there's just a whole thing going right through monotheism about the origin of evil and nature of evil. Theodicy. Theodicy, I think it's called.
There neither good nor evil until the distinction was created in the Garden of Eden when Eve ate the apple. At that point, the distinction was made.
Yeah, right. Yes, right. That's one interpretation. Yeah.
That's what Plato would say, wouldn't he?
I think he probably, yeah, I think he might.
But Plato was a polytheist.
Not really. No.
It didn't exist until, or neither existed until.
I think the form, the absolute form of good clearly shows that he was moving that he had abandoned polytheism and moved to monotheism. And that was his issue with the Olympian gods. You know, he couldn't accept that a god is evil and a god can be jealous and all that, which the Olympian gods were. And the noble lies, isn't it?
So in today's debate of does God exist, where would Plato sit there?
Good question.
Where would Plato sit? Does God exist? Well, look. I think what's interesting is that Plato influenced monotheism in this big way, but at this very high level, if you go and read the early fathers of the church, I've got some of their books here. You know, go and read it. I mean, the notion of what God is there is a million miles away from a bearded man in the sky.
Yeah.
So God, if you say God is one, as in the oneness of everything in the world, you know, in that fundamental way, that's Platonist, right?
So was
But is that what you're thinking of when you're saying God doesn't exist? You know?
But was Spinoza then? Did he believe in a God that had all the attributes, good, evil, whatever, that emanated? He sort of was more into the concept of God as being the whole of nature. That's
right. So for people who don't know, Spinoza was in the early 17th century in ex-Jew. He got excommunicated in Amsterdam. Yeah, in the kind of a very free society at that time, relatively. And he identified God with nature. I think that's probably one thing, a correct thing to say about Spinoza. I find him very difficult to read myself, but that's right, Mary. Yeah, I think he reduced it back to a notion that God is nature,
and it has all the attributes of humanity and human nature, of good and evil and just and unjust. It all emanates from that one God.
Yeah.
But Plato obviously doesn't subscribe to that. He didn't accept that there was an evil concept, so to speak, that was attributed to God.
Well, you know this difference between good and evil and good and bad, right? So good and evil is kind of like there's two forces fighting each other, the war of opposites. Whereas bad is just the lack of good, right? So some people are onto the good and bad thing, which is Augustinian Christianity, right, and Platonism. Whereas other people are more over to the Manichaeism, which is warring opposites. They're fighting each other, two forces fighting each other. And so that's what you get in Gnosticism. And they relate that, right, to matter. So you've got good and form and matter and evil.
Sorry, say that again. You have good.
Good. So you've got the Aristotelian opposition between the form that informs matter, right? So when God creates, when that's converted into Christianity, it will be God creates from matter, okay? But the creation, the matter is the evil thing, whereas the form, the pure form, is good. And so if you go and have a look at Gnosticism or Gnostic Christianity, it's in Christianity as well, Gnostic Christianity, there's this idea that when the demiurge, and when we read the Timaeus, we can relate to this, because they take the Timaeus and the Jewish God creator from Genesis, right? And they say, here's the demiurge. I hope this got this right. We've got someone we had someone, she should come and talk to us. We had someone in our classes who is a Gnostic Christian. She's a little church in Melbourne. Yeah, she's fascinating. I had coffee with her and I wanted to come back and talk to us about this. But so I hope if she's hearing this recording, I got it right. But what happened was in this creation, right, by the demiurge, this is not the principle. Like we were talking earlier about the principle of creation where we've got same and other and logos and stuff. This is actually like the demiurge comes in there and does this creation of our particular world, right? And he stuffs it up. Right. And so the fire of the form, the fire, the essence is in our souls. It's deep. This flame is in our souls, and we're trapped in the body. And what we need to do is get untrapped from the body. This is similar to Plato, isn't it? In the Phaedo, we've got to awaken the flame and come out of the body. That's kind of the Gnostic thing. So the evil is matter.
As to the question of whether what Plato, one commentator I read thought that to say God didn't exist was impiety, but it's fairly minor. He wasn't that bothered. You could argue with someone and say God does exist and so on. But to believe that God could be bargained with and, you know, you could exchange your good behavior for his reward was for Plato a greater impiety. So a lot of traditional religion for Plato was more impious than atheism, you know. So, but I haven't actually read the dialogue of Plato where he says that. It might have been the Laws, I'm not sure, but I just read that in a commentary.
Sounds good. Look, I say Plato's influence on Christianity and monotheism, just go to the Republic. Just go to the allegory of the sun and go to the form of the good and that sort of stuff. That's the influence on monotheism. And so it's completely different from the gods. Although Maria did a great talk last week in our Platonic Love, and thank you for that, Maria, which was beautiful, really. It relates to what Maria was just saying earlier. in the chat, those people who've done it, you might remember the winged horse chariot, and then there's this picture of this kind of this universe where you've got all of the 12 gods from the pantheon going around in a, isn't this right, Maria? In a circle.
Yeah.
And so that's
all except the Theon, which is in the center. Yeah. So you have the 11 gods.
So it's a beautiful picture of Plato going from polytheism to monotheism in this kind of whirlpool that's all going around one center. You know, they're not fighting each other, they're not eating the children, they're not doing all this nasty stuff. They're all in harmony, going around like planets going around, you know, around the earth.
I'm not widely read in Plato, but it seems to me that even though the writings that we've looked at talk about a divine and the ability of the divine to create something from nothing virtually, I think Plato seems to me to be stuck in the same eternal unanswered question of, well, who created that first nothingness? And coming back to Kula, who created the first turtle? Plato is stuck in the same question that we're still stuck in.
Just on another note, I think Christians also don't acknowledge the extent to which Greek philosophy influenced Jesus. And I think Jesus, in those sort of so-called lost years, traveled extensively. I believe he traveled to Egypt, he was in Smyrna, he was in Ephesus. And certainly in Smyrna, there's evidence that some evidence, I can't remember what, that he was actually there. But he traveled extensively. I think he was influenced by Greek philosophy. And I think Christianity is based on philosophical thought. And I think the Gnostics have, preserved that. There's something in, I'd be very, very interested to hear this girl who belongs to the Gnostic church.
Well, I'll see if she can come along to Platonism and Christianity. I was going to ask her. Yeah, I mean, the really interesting thing about their church is that, as people might know, Gnostics were only known as kind of the baddies in what are they called? Against all heresies. You know, books by the early church fathers that were called like Against All Heresies. And they say, and then there's the Gnostics. And they'd say, the Gnostics believe all this bad stuff. And that's all we knew about them, right? Until 1945, when this Gnostic library was discovered, and all these Gnostic texts in their original, they're in Coptic, but they're in the original, emerged. And so this Gnostic church, or there's a few of them all around the world, use these Gnostic texts as their Bible. These ones found in 1945. It's amazing.
Were they in Coptic or were they in Greek? Because
Oh, they were in Coptic.
Because Coptic wasn't. I didn't think Coptic was a written language except as hieroglyphics at that time, and it was used.
No. This is the demonic. This is Coptic, and there are quite a few of these types of texts that only have survived in Coptic, and one of the reasons for that has to do with climate.
Right.
Because because they're in the desert and they survived in the desert, whereas So okay. Well, look, I'll send her an email, and so if people want, I'll give her a little time in Platonism, Christianity to hopefully, if she obliges, to give a talk. She's actually a student studying archaeology because she wants to. She wants to find more texts.
What's her name? What's the church name?
Oh, Sethian. I can't remember. I can't remember. It's got Johann in it's related to John. So John's Gospel. They think they like John's Gospel. In the canonical Gospels, I think it's called Sethian. It's got Sethian in the title. I can send it around, the church name. Yeah, but yeah, let's do it. I'll get her along.
Yeah.
And we can she can explain it. She'd explain it better than I would.
One of the passages I remember hearing was in relation to making the blind man see, and the Gnostic interpretation of that was that they were saying to the people, don't be blind, open your eyes, and or no, what it was don't believe what you see or hear. Close your eyes and use your brain and think, and there you'll find the truth.
Sounds a bit like Plato's cave to me.
Yeah, and that's a little bit like Jesus making the blind man see, because they say everyone, we're all blind unless we think.
Yeah, and allegorical interpretation was very strong in the early church, and then there's been this this fight between the literal interpretations of the gospel and the allegorical interpretations, and there was quite a fight about that in the early church. So Luke's gospel and the Luke people were into the literal interpretations, and like the followers of John's gospel were very much the other way. And so this is the interesting thing at the Nag Hammadi library that we're talking about, is there's what I would call a non-Gnostic text, which is the Gospel of St. Thomas, right? And so that's really interesting, because you have in the synoptic gospels, you have this story of doubting Thomas, right? So Thomas said that the resurrection is actually a resurrection in spirit. It's not a physical resurrection, it's a resurrection in spirit. And so the literalists were saying, no, he rose in body. And so we've got these stories about him rising in body. You don't get in Mark, you don't get in the early ones, but you get it in the later ones, right? Rising in body. And Thomas is sitting there, and they say, Thomas, put your hand in the side of Jesus, feel the blood, feel the viscera, and know that it's a physical thing, right? So there's this fight between this spiritual awakening and the literal interpretation that goes on. That goes on, and the allegorical interpretation is related to the spiritual interpretation. The literal interpretation is much more physical, much more about a literal and a physical interpretation, and that's where you get all the relics, the cult of the relics. Here's a part of the cross and all that sort of thing. It really happened.
Yeah, with the amount of so many pieces of the cross, I mean, cloning must have been invented in the Middle Ages.
Yeah, the cross must have been bigger than the Colossus.
I'm a big fan of relics. It's pretty funny, relics, really, isn't it? You know, the Protestants tried to get rid of all the relics, you know that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but then they also tried to get rid of alcohol.
Really?
And laughter and dancing. all the good things.
All the fun things.
Yeah.
How'd you go, Helen? Did you enjoy the Sophist?
Oh, very funny. Thank you.
You thought
Thanks,
the Sophist was
Bernie.
funny. Right.
Oh, such a good course. I just looked up Melbourne, melbournegnosis.com. Gosh, there's quite a few.
Isn't it Sense of Narix? Hume's just found something with this in